Hey everyone, ready to really shake things up when it comes to how we think about kids and learning?
I'm game if you are.
All right, we're going all the way back to 19th century Germany to meet Karl Witte, who became a university professor by the age of 9.
You're going to make me say it again, aren't you? A university professor at 9.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right? But hold on, before you start picturing some strict, intense hothouse scenario, that's not what this is about at all.
Not even close.
We're actually going to be digging into the education of Karl Witte, written by his dad, who, get this, was a clergyman.
No kidding. Not a professional educator by any stretch, but he really dove headfirst into early childhood education.
Exactly. And his book, well, it wasn't just a proud papa bragging. It really sparked a huge debate about how we educate young minds way back in the 1800s, and it's amazing how relevant it still is today.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about one of the biggest anxieties I think parents have today. This fear of pushing kids too hard, too early. I think Karl Sr. would just laughed at that, don't you?
Honestly, yeah.
I mean, his son was living proof that learning itself wasn't the problem. It was how it was presented that made all the difference.
1,000%. Karl Sr. always said it wasn't about shielding kids from knowledge. He was adamant that it was actually worry, lack of interest, and being forced into a rigid structure that really crushed a child's spirit, not learning itself. And think about it for a sec. Kids, they're naturally curious. It's like they're hardwired to learn.
Totally. It's in their DNA. And there's actually something kind of cool here. They were onto something big back then that science is now proving. We've got this concept of neuroplasticity now.
Oh yeah, neuroplasticity. Love it.
Yeah. It means our brains are literally made to learn and adapt our whole lives, but especially in those early years.
It's like, forget this idea that a kid's brain is this fragile little thing you can break. Think of it more like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Right. What a great analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did they actually put this into practice with little Karl? One of the biggest things I took away from the book is how much emphasis they put on what Karl Sr. called living language.
It's so important.
Yeah.
Long before formal lessons, they were surrounding Karl with this really rich, descriptive language. They were having real conversations, not that sing-song baby talk.
Like grown-up talk. And you know that part in the book that always gets me? There's this little detail about how they'd playfully call Karl out if he used a simpler word when there was a more precise one he could have used. It was this fun challenge to level up his vocabulary without even realizing he was learning.
Subtle, right. But those little nudges can make all the difference. They created this whole atmosphere where language wasn't a chore. It was just a natural, enjoyable part of life.
And not just vocabulary lists or anything. They used language to spark his curiosity, to make learning fun.
For sure.
Which actually leads us to another one of Karl Sr.'s principles.
Yeah.
No flashcards, no boring lectures.
Definitely not.
Karl Sr. was all about sneaking those early lessons into games, stories, everyday activities. He called it stealing the time for learning.
I love that. It's so true, though. Finding those hidden moments to teach something new without ever making it feel like school.
It's kind of like that saying, what is it, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
But for kids, it's more like, find learning you love and you'll never feel like you're studying.
100%.
And I think one of the best examples is this letter game Karl Sr. dreamed up to teach his son how to read.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
It wasn't like sitting down with a phonics book, drilling letters and sounds. It was all about turning reading into a game. A challenge.
Which, let's be real, kids today would eat that up. Especially with all the learning apps and games they have now.
They're all about gamifying everything. And speaking of making learning fun, can we talk about how the Witte family did travel? It's like they had this gift for turning every trip into an education adventure. And we're not talking about your run-of-the-mill sightseeing tour here.
Oh, no, not at all. This was next-level travel. Karl Sr., he was all about planning those trips, but not just, where are we going to eat? We're talking serious map study sessions with young Karl, learning about historical figures from different towns, geography, the works, and here's the real kicker.
Okay, I'm hooked. What's the kicker?
They didn't just have the experience, they relived it.
Wait, what? Like a slideshow night when they got home? Is that what you mean?
Well, sort of. They'd actually reenact the whole trip, right there in their living room. Toys, drawings, you name it. Anything to recreate the places they visited and all those memories.
Wow, I can practically see them now. Huddled around, building a little map on the floor, talking about everything they learned. Talk about making those memories stick.
Exactly. And Think about all those senses working overtime. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. They weren't just, passively listening. They were reliving it, making it this really immersive learning experience.
It makes you wonder what our family vacations would look like if we stole a few moves from Carl Sr.'s playbook. But hold on a sec. We've talked a lot about exploration and learning, but it's easy to get stuck on this image of young Carl as this walking encyclopedia. Didn't Carl Sr. care about, raising a good person?
Absolutely. For him, character was non-negotiable. Being smart wasn't enough. Carl had to be a good human, too.
And those stories about how they instilled those values. Like, remember that one about teaching young Carl about resisting temptation? Bread and water for dinner? That one always gets me.
Oh, it's such a good story. And it wasn't about punishing him. Carl Sr. really took the time to explain how sugary treats, they satisfy you for a minute, but then they're gone, Compared to that feeling you get when you resist, that lasts. Delayed gratification at its finest.
They were masters at finding those teachable moments in the everyday stuff. But they didn't shy away from tougher conversations either. Like, Carl Sr. actually encouraged his son to question everything, even those big-time historical figures everyone worships.
Right. He wasn't afraid to get a little critical. I mean, there's that great example in the book where Carl Sr. is praising the poetry of Horace. Great poet, obviously. But then he's like, but don't get it twisted, this guy. He liked to party a little too much.
He was basically saying, admire the accomplishments, but don't put anyone on a pedestal. Think for yourselves.
So good. Yeah. Like he was saying, hey, nobody's perfect. Even the greats made mistakes. It's so important to remember that even today. But okay, we've been diving deep into Karl Witte's childhood, how his dad raised him. I think the big question is how much of this translates to, raising kids now. The world has changed a lot since the 1800s.
It has. That's the question, isn't it? It's tempting to think we can just, copy and paste this whole system, but it's obviously not that simple. Right. Kids today have the internet, video games, all this stuff that wasn't even imaginable back then.
Totally. And every kid is different. That's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah, and that's something Carl Sr. really understood, wasn't it? He wasn't following some rigid formula. He was always paying attention to what made Carl tick, what he was good at, even the stuff he struggled with.
Absolutely. Adapting, adjusting. It's all about finding what works for that individual child. There's no one size fits all.
It's like, we can get so caught up in wanting our kids to be successful, however we define that these days. But this whole idea of giving them the space to discover who they are, what lights them up, that feels so much more powerful.
It is. And fun. Let's not forget about fun. Carl Sr., he was all about making learning enjoyable. And that's something we could all use a little more of, don't you think?
100%. And that actually brings us to the other thing I've been thinking about this whole time. If there's one thing our listeners take away from this whole deep dive, what do you hope it is?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think, for me, it all comes down to this. What if, instead of focusing on, creating these perfect little prodigies, we just focused on helping our kids fall in love with learning?
It's about nurturing that natural curiosity they're born with, right?
Exactly. Because who knows, maybe we'll end up with a whole generation of kids who are excited to learn, to explore, even if they don't all become professors by the age of 9.
And hey, if they do, more power to them. That's awesome. But you're right. It's about so much more than that. It's about raising kind, curious, engaged humans. And I think Carl Sr. would definitely raise a glass to that.
Absolutely. To curiosity.
To curiosity. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Karl Witte and early childhood education. As always, thanks for listening. We'll be back next time with another fascinating deep dive. Until then, happy learning, everyone.